Everybody, Nicole Whip from the Family and Aging Law Center here. So I'm trying this again. I tried this a little bit ago, but my internet wasn't working very well, so now I'm trying it again. I wanted to come on today to talk about something that came across my radar the other day, and it just really struck me, and I felt super compelled to come on and talk to you guys about it because it's so important to have these conversations. In the New York Times about 2 days ago, there was an article that brought to light some information that the Federal Reserve had been tracking, and that was done via a thing called the Consumer Bankruptcy Project. And what they found was that older Americans, Americans 65 to 74, had a whopping increase of 204%, 204% of bankruptcy filings in the years 1991 to 2014. And when I saw that statistic, it really made me stop in my tracks because as an elder law attorney, of course, people in their money in their older years, this is very much what we're concerned with as elder law attorneys. And so immediately I suspected what the problem was, but I wasn't sure. So of course I had to go on and read the article. And what I found out was the number one reason that there's such an increase in bankruptcy filings among older Americans is due to unexpected medical expenses. So then I started doing some more research, and the reality of the matter is that when I look at the role of what I do as an elder law attorney and also what we see every single day in our office, and then we compare that to both the information that we have, government data, and other consumer group data, what we learn is that people just really are not prepared for medical expenses. People aren't prepared for medical expenses, period, but certainly older Americans are not prepared for medical expenses. In fact, approximately 20% of medical expenses for all Americans, for all older Americans, are directly related to out of pocket Medicare related costs. And so if you think about that, if your income is automatically cut by a minimum of 20% just based on out of pocket medical expenses, then what does that mean for the remainder of your income and how that gets allocated over time? And that does not include, by the way, long term care expenses. That's just out of pocket expenses related to Medicare specifically. So, one of the things that we see a lot in my office is just that people are not prepared for the actual reality of what Medicare does and does not do for them. And so, it's really important if you or somebody that you love is going into these retirement years and you're going to be on a fixed income, that you have absolute clarity about what that really means and what you need to expect when it comes to what your out of pocket expenses are going to be, especially when it comes to healthcare. Because, like I said, if you're automatically taking on average 20% off the top, then that's a significant amount. So that's one of the first things. Now, the other thing is that people are not taking into consideration, of course, at all long-term care. And that, I think, is something that is, of course, even more threatening to Americans when it comes to their lifetime financial security. If you're looking at the situation, like, what is it going to mean for me to live out the remainder of my life? Am I going to be able to, live out the remainder of my life without going bankrupt, without going into poverty? Then these are the things that you need to be thinking about. And so long-term care expenses are certainly a big, big, huge part about that. Now, the threat of long-term care expenses, right now, the U.S. Department of Health and Services, Long-Term Services and Supports for Older Americans Risk and Financing Research Brief, yeah, that's this huge long name, they found in 2017 that over half of Americans turning 65 are going to need long-term care services. Over half of Americans turning 65. So, okay, I just told you that 20% of your income is coming off the top related to out-of-pocket Medicare expenses. Medicare does not cover, by the way, long-term care expenses. And if 50% of Americans are going to need long-term care, then what does that mean to what's the money in your pocket and what you're going to be able to afford? And so that's the reason why I say this risk is even more when you factor in long-term care expenses. On a final note, the other thing that this bankruptcy filings noted was that the further research on these bankruptcy filings noted is that another one of the big reasons why older Americans are filing bankruptcy is due to their paying the expenses of other people. And so sometimes an older American is paying their parents' expenses. They're taking on the financial burden of their own parents. But, and I think this is one of the things that is definitely not talked about enough, and certainly is sort of like, a sort of like almost a dirty little secret among families, is how many people actually are still taking on the burden of taking care of their adult children as they age. One of the things that never ceases to amaze me when I'm sitting down with clients in my office is to discover how many of my clients that have children that still live with them and that they are paying all the expenses or a majority of the expenses for these children. Now, before you step back and say, oh, those millennials, they just mooch off their parents, we never can get rid of them. I am not talking about millennials, actually. What we see in our office a lot of times is baby boomer children still living with their parents with no bringing in no income into their parents' home, paying no expenses in their parents' home, and not necessarily being caregivers to their parents, although that may be part of what's going on, but they are basically living off of their parents as adult children. And so, this idea that millennials are living off of their parents is probably pretty real, but it isn't just millennials that are doing this. It's people, children that I wouldn't consider a child, right? I'm in Gen X, but a majority of my clients are baby boomers and then what we would call older Americans. The baby boomer children are actually living off of their older American parents. And so this is actually also causing a crush of financial problems for older Americans that they simply can't bear. And when we look at a dramatic increase of 204% in bankruptcy filings among people of this demographic, then we just cannot, if you care about people in your life, if you care about people in your community, if you care about the idea that somebody that's older is going to fall into poverty and is not going to be able to live out the remainder of their life in any sort of comfort, if you're the kind of person that cares about those things, I know I am, and the people that work with me are definitely like that as well, then we can't afford to ignore this is a true and serious problem. And we can't allow for not having these conversations as families, as communities, about what is it, if you're taking care of your adult children, or if you're the adult children being taken care of, or if maybe you have a sibling that your parents are taking care of your sibling. And then this needs to really start becoming in the forefront as a family conversation about what is the realistic sense of this over the course of your parent's lifetime. Because very often what we're seeing in our office is that it's not a realistic financial scenario. And in fact, from an elder law perspective, it's going to cause tons of financial problems if somebody actually needs long-term care in the future. And so, all right. I know I just dumped a bunch of information on you, and it was very much triggered by this New York Times article, and it just really brought out this passionate side of me about what I do and how important the work that we do here is. But I just will say, a lot of this, it feels very gloom and doom all the time. When I'm talking about elder law stuff, for so many people, it just is so gloomy, doomy kind of discussion. It feels very heavy. It feels very negative. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's much more negative to actually have to face it, to actually have to deal with it, to actually be in the situation, especially when there are things that can be done to either eliminate or mitigate this as a threat to your parents, to yourselves over time. And what that really requires is to have the right professionals on board with you, whether it's your legal professionals, people like myself that are elder law attorneys, the right financial professionals that really understand this whole balance of long-term care, Medicare, and everything else, and your tax professionals. So it's that comprehensive approach that will sort of fend off some of these problems. Now, for some people, this problem is not going to ever go away just based on their ability to retain lifetime financial security. And the reality is bad things happen to good people. But we want to avoid that as much as possible. That's always my goal. And I just think that when we look at this information, when we look at this data, when we see that this is the information that's coming directly from the Federal Reserve, from Department of Health and Human Services, from these federal agencies, that this is the information that they track. I'm not making this information up. This is information that's publicly available out there. Then there's something that is very problematic, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to know that there are things that we can do to solve these problems. And so that's partly what we're here for. We're also here to help you guys get to the right resources. But first, you have to recognize that this is a potential problem and then be willing to do something about it. And of course, if you have any questions about your situation, always feel free to give us a call and or come into our office and have a conversation with us, because that's what we do. But I just really felt so passionate about this after I saw the article. I wanted to share it with you. I will definitely put the link to that specific article down in the comments below. And I will also be able to provide to you any other citations referencing any of the information that I brought forth today, because there's a bunch of white papers and other things like that. If you're the kind of person that likes to delve into the information, I'll make it available to you. Otherwise, just know that everything I told you today is based on publicly available data and information that is based on the research that's being done by our government today. So hopefully you thought this was interesting, maybe a little bit scary. If it's not something that you have done something about in the past, it's time. It's time to step up to the plate and get all these things taken care of. So anyway, I'm going to do a little bit more of this kind of stuff because I come across these tidbits a lot and I get all fired up about it, and then I like talk to my staff about it. But they don't, I'm preaching to the choir when I'm talking to the team. You guys are the ones that need to hear these things. So anytime I come across something like this that I think is good for you to know, I'll come on here and do this. And then also, if you don't know, we do have a YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to that as well, where I go in more depth about just specific legal topics. All right, everybody, hope you're having a great day. It's Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be talking to you soon. Bye-bye.